welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we are underneath my 06 Saab 9.3 and we're looking at the front either torque arm, transmission mount, or motor mount, whatever you want to call it. And if we look at this right here, we can see the rubber is starting to crack, and so it's time to replace this, and that's what we're going to do today. So this is on an automatic transmission Saab 9.3. The manual has a slightly different part, and so mine's an automatic, and that actually does make a difference on this repair. All right, for the tools that you're going to need for this job, and I think this is a really important step to think through before you attempt this job, is to make sure you've got the right tooling to do it, because there's one bolt in particular that's going to make your life a lot more difficult than it otherwise should be. So, first thing to get started here, safety glasses. If you're working under a car, you absolutely need safety glasses, no questions asked. You may want some gloves on your hands to protect your hands under the car. That's up to you. Or other gloves to protect your hands. You're also going to want a light because of there's a bolt at the very top of the bracket that's just hard to get to and see. And so having a light available, preferably something that's got a magnetic end on it. This is just that Braun Harbor Freight light that I think has become pretty ubiquitous. So we'll set that aside. And now on to the shiny tools. The first thing that you're going to need is going to be an E18 external Torx socket. So it looks like this is basically the inverse of a Torx socket. So that's a size E18. There's four bolts that are going to require this. This is a 1/2-inch drive one. If you could actually get an E18 and a 3/8 drive, your life may be a little easier, but mine was a 1/2-inch drive. We'll set that aside. And then I also have a short 1/2-inch adapter. I also have a 1/2-inch to 3/8 reducer, about a 3-inch 3/8 extension, a 6-inch 1/2-inch extension, and then I also have, and this is one of the holy grails of my setup here, is a Snap-on FZ1 right angle adapter. I'll put a card up here in the corner for more information about this, but this is going to get us out of jail to be able to create a custom breaker bar setup to be able to break loose the very specific obnoxious bolt. And then we're going to need an 18mm socket. This is a 1/2-inch drive. Now one of the options if you don't have an E-Torx is you may be able to use a 14mm universal. I'll end up using this on the job likely. But if you've got the spline drive, the advantage of the spline drive over the E-Torx is it gives you a few more degrees of freedom. So this is basically a 6-point socket. This is the 12-point variant of it that works on the job. So that if you're so when you have to put in the breaker bar, this gives you just a little bit more finer rotation to be able to adjust your breaker bar incrementally with it. You may have, if you also have the shallow one, that might be useful too. I only have this in a deep, but that's a 14mm universal or a spline drive. And then on for the ratchet, so I've got a 3/8 breaker bar. This is going to be used for breaking loose the odd bolt up top and fishing this around the transmission coolant line and the other engine parts. A 3/8 flex head, and you may be able to use the 3/8 flex head instead of the 3/8 breaker bar. And if your 3/8 ratchet is no longer, this is about as long as you're going to be able to go, and from head to toe this is 11.5 inches. And so you may be able to get away without the breaker bar and just using a 3/8 flex head. Ideally, if you had a 3/8 flex head torque wrench that was 11.5 or maybe 12 inches long, that would be a great addition, but I don't have one of those. I'm not even sure they make a 3/8 flex head torque wrench in about 12-inch long length. If you know of one, please let me know. That would be a great tool to know about. I also have a 1/2-inch flex head. This helps us give me the extra leverage with the extra length. Then I've got just a regular 1/2-inch ratchet. It's just a round head ratchet. The finer tooth some of these ratchets are, the easier your life is going to be. I've got a 1/2-inch breaker bar, and then I've got a 1/2-inch torque wrench. And then one of the tools I don't have, but I can kind of guess on here, is being able to measure angle. You can buy very specific angle adapters that tell you if you've reached the specific angle beyond the torque, or if you've got a digital torque wrench that has an angle setting, that would be useful as well. Again, some of this could be removed possibly if you had a 3/8 torque wrench that was a flex head, and or you had the E18 socket or a spline drive in the 14mm equivalent and a 3/8 drive. I only have it in a 1/2 inch. I also have a 1/2 inch impact, but there's no way I was going to be able to get my impact up there. So this is all being done with hand tools today. And so the last tool that you may need is this, which is a block of wood. This is just a cut-off 2x6 that's slightly larger than the head on my jack. And I'm going to use this on the top of my jack to help support the transmission, so that when I take out the mount, that the transmission is supported by the jack, which also means you need a good jack to help support your transmission. You're going to need the jack to lift the car and jack stands. I'm not going to show you how to jack up the car. Make sure you do it safely. That's all up to you. Safety is #1 priority. If you don't feel comfortable working under the car, then don't do this job, because you will be underneath it and your hands will be tied up over your head while working on it. So remember to always be safe. If it doesn't feel right to you, then don't do it. Let someone else do it. All in all, this will probably take you about 45 minutes. From beginning to end, it's not hard. It just requires just some nimble hands for getting around up in the car. So let's take a look at some of the parts that we're going to use on this job, and then we'll go over to the car and get started. The parts we're going to need for this repair are going to be obviously a new mount. Now in this case here, you actually have to buy the whole bracket along with the rubber on the inside here. It all comes as one unit. It's actually pretty reasonably priced. If I remember right, it was like $70-some, give or take. Not bad. When you're looking for this part, sometimes it's referred to as a torque arm, other times it's referred to as an engine mount or a front transmission mount. It goes by a couple different names. I'll see if I can put some links there. Here's the part number here. I ordered this from eeuroparts.com, not a sponsor. And so I also got, just because I know they're going to be hard to find, replacement E-Torx bolts that are the 3 that hold this on. So if we look at the part here, we can see there's 1 up top and then 2 here at the bottom. And so I thought, just in case there was any problems with these, I might as well try to have the actual OEM bolts. These are the E-Torx size. This may not be necessary, but I thought it might be good to have it. Now, something that's almost essential to go with this is going to be a new bolt that actually goes through the housing here, and a nut. This is a torque to yield bolt, and requires torque and angle for its actual tightening spec. So I got the bolt and the nut that goes with it to replace as well. I just thought I'd have a complete hardware setup for replacing everything. So the first thing we're going to need to do to get started, before we start messing with this motor mount, is let's talk about the sequence of parts to remove. So the first thing we're going to need to remove is there's a bolt that goes left to right across your screen through the mount. That's going to have to get undone. That's going to require an E-Torx socket and the hex socket. We're going to remove that first, and then we're going to remove our 3 other bolts back there. But before we do that at all, I'm going to come back with my jack and use the jack to help support the rest of the transmission, because when this is out, we're going to have a problem with actually supporting that. So we've got to make sure that's supported. So we're going to put our jack in under here. So it's going to make the space a little bit crowded under here and may interfere with the camera sight lines for what you can and can't see. And so that's going to be our next step, is to get this supported before we start disassembling this, because the disassembly and reassembly should go pretty quickly. It's just a setup to make sure that we're being safe and everything is secure and properly supported is very important. Let's take a quick little look at the tools I'm going to use for removing the cross bolt. First, I'm using a 1/2 inch breaker bar with my E18 E-Torx socket and a second ratchet with an 18mm hex on it. You should be able to get away with just a shallow socket, although a semi-deep might actually be perfect here if you've got a 1/2 inch 18mm semi-deep. Of course, I think you could still use a deep socket with no problem, but a shallow will work just fine. Semi-deep is probably the ideal size for this, or ideal length. So now let's get the bolt removed. Now with the cross bolt removed, here's what we got here. Our bolt actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. And we got our nut. Just going to thread this back in like this. And now that's important to remember is the orientation, that our E-Torx was to the passenger side and the hex was to the driver's side. So pay attention to that if we're going to try to put everything back together the way that it came. So E-Torx to the passenger side, hex to the driver's side. So now let's talk about the tool to remove the top bolt. It is a very obstructed bolt, So you can see I've got a very extreme, or a little bit of an odd custom tool here, if you will. Let's go through what we've got. So at the business end, we've got an E18 E-Torx, and then that goes into a 3/8 reducer. This is a 1/2-inch drive one. If I had a 3/8, I could skip that one. And then I've got a Snap-on FZ1 right angle adapter. I've got a video all about these, and this is just such an invaluable extra little bit of kit, little piece of kit that will save you and your tail for obstructed bolts like this. And I've just got a little short 3-inch extension and a 3/8 breaker bar, and this will be enough to get me around the obstruct, and this will be enough bit of kit to get around that without damaging that or having to remove anything else to make this job more difficult than what it is. So the secret sauce here is a Snap-on FZ1 that just allows me to make that turn. A little bit of an odd piece of kit, worth every penny of it. Aha, success. And then to remove the bottom 2 bolts, we're going to use our E18 E-Torx socket, basically an 1.5-inch extension and a breaker bar, and that's all we're going to need for tools, and then just our hands to be able to remove the bolts the rest of the way by hands, because you got to catch the bracket on its way out. Let's take a quick look at our parts side by side to make sure we've got the right part. Indeed, everything looks like it lines up. We've got this little flange up here which actually does nothing. In this case, I suppose that maybe on another model it might do something. We got the same shape. Let's put it on its side. Look at these side by side. We see a 226 and a 226. If you look at the brand new one, I can definitely move it. If I move the old one, let's see if we see the stress fracture here. It looks like it definitely moves maybe a little bit more. Let's look at the other side where the fracture is. Right there, there we go. There we can see the rubber starting to tear. Right along here. So that's the reason why we're replacing it here. It's definitely dirty and grimy from being under the engine. And so while this is off, I'm going to take a look up under the car and do some other cleaning. And clearly we got our part here, so now we need to go ahead and install it. Before installing the new part, let's take a quick look at our reference diagram here out of the service manual. And a couple things here. There is some torque specs here to pay attention to. So the 3 bolts that we took off that hold the bracket on, those have a tightening torque of 59 foot-pounds or 80 Newton meters. But then the nut and bolt combination that goes through has a spec for 44 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees. So we have torque and angle, and that's why I'm going to be using a new bolt, just because to make sure that that is spot on and we can get the torque required to get that. I believe that is a torque to yield bolt, so I'm not going to reuse that. So let's go to the car and get this remounted. It'll go together much the same as it did coming off. The biggest challenge is going to be getting the proper torque up top. The torque up top, I suspect, is going to have to be good and tight, and as tight as I can get it with the right breaker bar combination for what feels right and what feels close enough to that 59 foot-pounds. There's no way I'm going to be able to get my torque wrench up in there to be able to get that exactly spot on at 59 foot-pounds, unfortunately. If you took the front radiator off and the front bumper off, sure, that'd be no problem, but we're going to get it good and tight, and as long as I can tug on and it feels close enough to 59 pounds, that'll satisfy me. You make your own judgment call on how well you feel like you can guess on what 59 foot-pounds feels like to your own body. The first step to get started here is I'm actually going to use my brand new bolts, just because I feel better with having brand new bolts to hold everything in. They're nice and clean and easy to work with. I've got the old bolts. I'm going to clean those up later. But we're going to go with these brand new bolts. If we look at them on the head, they all say 10.9. They've got this nice finish. It'll look nice under the car. I know no one really looks under there, but for my own peace of mind, we'll start with some nice clean bolts. And then we're going to put these in by hand under there first, to hand tighten them up just to get the bracket in alignment. And then we will proceed to torque these down before we put in the cross bolt. Let's take a look at our setup here for torquing the bolt. We got our torque wrench here set to 59 foot-pounds, and then we got our E18 Torx here. I went with a 6-inch extension just so it will get me some clearance away from it for the torque wrench to be able to fit. And so doing this for the bottom 2 bolts. The top one's going to be done entirely by hand. There was just, I don't know if there's any way I can get a torque wrench up there. My breaker bar, my combination, what I used to remove it is going to be what I'm going to have to do to use to put it back on. It's going to require some iterative movement. This is where I wish that that there was maybe a 12-point version of an E-Torx. The other option would be to go with a universal spline drive. That would give you a few more degrees of option for being able to rotate the socket. So the tools I used for getting the top bolt in was I used my 14mm universal spline drive socket to get it hand tight. And I was kind of get my hands around the knurling here just to make sure I got it seated. And then I also had the same little tool that I had before to be able to come in with the breaker bar to get tightened up. Then I was able to kind of fish my 3/8 flex head ratchet in there to get it. I got it to what felt like 59 foot-pounds. Based on how the torque wrench felt on the other 2 bolts. So I personally feel fine with how I got it. Your mileage may vary in terms of how confident you are in your own work. And now for the tools we're going to use to put in the cross bolt. We're going to have our 18mm socket on a ratchet. We're going to have our E18 Torx on the torque wrench, properly spec'd, and our bolt. Now remember, the orientation of this is that the Torx head goes towards the passenger and the bolt goes to the driver's side, at least in the US. I don't know if you're in Australia or someplace where you have where you have right-hand drive cars, if that's reversed or not. Don't know that. And remember, on tightening the cross bolt here, we want to go 44 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees. Based on the space we've got underneath the car on jack stands, that's probably going to be 2 turns of the ratchet at 45 degrees each. Some torque wrenches actually have an angle gauge on it. Mine does not. Mine's just a standard click one. So we'll click at 44, and then we'll go probably 2 turns at 45 to actually get our full 90 degrees of angle that we need on that bolt. Okay, so you just saw the click there for the proper torque. Now, because the torque ratchet creates a clearance issue, we're going to switch ratchets so we can get the 90 degrees that we need. On that, you see I've got the second ratchet in the background because that's holding the bolt. I'm going to be applying the 90 degrees to the E-Torx end of it on this side closest to the camera. It's time to switch ratchets, and we'll keep going to get the proper amount of angle. Alright, so I've got my 3/8 flex head ratchet on it, and I have to go 90 degrees, so this is going to probably be, if I go from here over here, will get me to 45. I'm sorry, get me to 90, so I actually do have 90 degrees of room here if I can pull it off. Now we got that good and tight. We got that pretty darn close to 90 degrees. I think there's a few degrees off. I would guess there's maybe about 87. 86 degrees instead of 90. All right, so I've switched ratchets here to a different one, helping me to get the last couple degrees of the angle that we need on this fastener. There we go. That should be our full 90 degrees of angle that we need on the fastener. And now we can actually drop the jack that's holding up our transmission. And then this will have the weight on it. And then take the car off the jack stands and finish the job. And that's it. So this job takes maybe about a half hour, 45 minutes. The biggest issue is dealing with the tooling changes that you need to be able to get to all these bolts that you need back here. Hope you found this video useful and interesting, and have a great day. Bye.